Thank you, Speaker. It's an honour to rise as the 6th Labor member for Preston. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people upon whose land we are gathered. And I'd like to begin by thanking the people of Preston and Reservoir for electing me as their representative. Elections are this wonderful opportunity for all of us to have this great big collective discussion about government, and we knocked on about 5,000 doors, and we were lucky to have a remarkably diverse set of conversations about all of the ways in which the words and actions of government touch upon the lives of the people of Preston and Reservoir. I'd like to give a shout out to Steve and Laura in West Preston, who talked to us about climate change. I'd like to shout out to Amalia, also in West Preston, who really liked the idea of bringing back the SEC. A shout out to Nicole in Keon Park, who talked to us about the challenges of crossing the railway line. For reasons that I don't fully understand, when they built the railway line in Reservoir, they built about 2 kilometre stretch that has no rail crossings. I don't know if any other members have a stretch that long in an established suburb with no crossing, but it's certainly a long way for those who perhaps live on one side and have their child zoned into a school on the other. You have to go all the way down and back again. And it's known sometimes locally as the Berlin Wall for that reason. And for a long time, historically, the problem was those crossings, as a result, were very congested. Anyway, I'm very proud to be part of a Labor government, and indeed the first government in 100 years to do something about that problem, which is that we have made it easier to cross at Reservoir Station, fixing one of the worst intersections in the north, and we are in the process of making it easier to cross at Keon Parade. And of course, in doing so, we are also making it possible to run more trains more often and build a more public transport-oriented city. Shout out to Kath from Newlands Friends of the Forest, who, as you may guess, lives in Newlands and talked to us about the forests, but who also very thoughtfully and very seriously let us know about the passing away of her close neighbour and our friend, the local Labor legend Lily Coy, Vale Lily Coy. A shout out to Tim in Reservoir East, who reminded me that the Bolte Liberal government had a plan for quite some time to put a freeway across the top of the Merry Creek and a freeway across the top of the Darebin Creek, the infamous F2 and F6 as they were to be. We're very lucky that those plans did not go ahead, and I should make it very clear that this Labor government's policy is the exact opposite. We are going to increase protection for those creeks, and we are going to plant trees and shrubs and ground cover so that they are more natural for the next generation, not less. A shout out to everyone in Preston and Reservoir who lives in public housing. We made a particular priority to door knock public housing dwellings, and we will continue to do so. A shout out to all the young kids who translated for me on behalf of their parents, which is just always amazingly cute, but also I feel like sometimes very hard. There was one young man down near Clements Reserve whose mum was very animated about public housing rents, and I think Guled, I don't know if Guled's here, anyway, thank you Guled for bailing him out. A shout out to Janya, Sylvia, Mauricio, Mark, Gwenda, Caroline, Christina, Genevieve, Zeng, Chris, Maria, and the approximately 300 or so other people who talked to me about Preston Market. I thank the Minister for the generosity of her time in allowing me to convey their thoughts to her in quite some detail. For those of you who don't know, Preston Market is the second largest market in Melbourne. It is a great market. It is privately owned, and the current majority owners would like to move it into the southeast corner of that site and put 19-storey apartment buildings on top of it. And one way perhaps to think about that, for those of you who aren't familiar with the area, is to imagine perhaps this building, which actually sits on a very similar 5-hectare site next to a train station. You could, if you so desired, demolish this building, move all of us into a small, more modern, more efficient building in the southern perhaps part of the site, and then you could put up 19-storey buildings where we stand today. Planning people would tell you that that would positively activate East Melbourne. I hope I did actually share that with some planning people, as the Minister know, and they took it a little too seriously. But I would like to think for those of us who know and love this space that we would see that that activation certainly came at a great cost, and that basically you were really saying you valued apartments more than the Parliament. And for those of us who live near Preston Market and love it, we do feel that the proposals that have been put forward very clearly say that the people who wrote them value apartments over the market. And I won't go on about it at length, but there are other proposals about, including from the Save the Preston Market group, that have an alternative proposal that many of us think is much more reasonable. I'd like to thank the Labor Party, its affiliated trade unions and the broader Labor movement. There is a bit of a tradition in these speeches to try and whip through several decades of camaraderie in about 3 minutes, and in the spirit of the member for Bayswater, I'm going to try and do that now. I will start on Monday, 19th of August 1997, when David Dyer, a fellow student at the University of Melbourne, encouraged me to attend a meeting the next day with a 20-year-old young campus activist known as Lizzie Blanthorne, who is, of course, well known to this place as the former member for Pascoe Vale. And I can tell you that at age 20, Lizzie already had extraordinary judgment, great Labor values, and was pretty much ready to walk into this place. And I say that because in very stark contrast, I was not. I wasn't really ready to take on anything. And I think if we're honest, Lizzie only signed me up because I happen to have some very specific technical skills, desktop publishing, as we called it, called it back then, that were useful in a student election campaign. I look back now, and I was certainly a young man with a lot to learn, and I'm doing these things in chronological order, in part because I think the people who had to work with me early on did have a lot of work to do. In that spirit, I'd like to thank Jessie Noneman, Mandy Coulson and Anne Smith. All three of them will have totally forgotten who I am, but a long, long time ago they called me out for various stupid things that I wrote and said in campus newsletters and the like, and they were right. And 24 years later, I have their emails still with me to this day. I want to thank the wonderful 2004-2005 Jacinta Collins Wantirna South electorate office team, Helen Cooney, Gabby Staffer, Lizzie, Johnny McClendon, and of course Senator Collins herself. I'd like to thank the head office team of 2005, including Sel Sandley, Alison Vaughan, James Pollock, James Rains, and the inimitable Bruce Cohen. I'd like to thank Robin Scott and the late Michael Layton. I'm grateful to them for introducing me to Preston and Reservoir many years ago. My brother had actually, before that, worked as a police officer in Reservoir. He was the very first person who said to me in about 2001 that I should stop saying reservoir and say reservoir. But Robin and Michael were a great support to me for many years when I was still a relatively young man. And I can actually remember at that time that Michael used to send me emails from Question Time on his BlackBerry, which I found amazing in every possible respect. Of course, more common now, and perhaps, possibly a few people maybe even doing it as I speak. It was also about the same time, circa 2006, that I had the opportunity to meet and begin working with Michael Donovan. Michael has been an immense source of support and mentorship to me, as he has been to many others, and I hope his influence continues for a long time, because it is an influence that always acts in the interest of his union members and the broader Labor movement. Thank you to Jamila Rizvi, Andrew Anson, Cecilia Bergman and Sebastian Zwolf. Thank you to Bob Corbell, Andrew Novakis, Annette Hurley, Trevor Nichols and the data team of the federal election 2013. Thank you to James Molino and my old boss from whom I learnt a great deal, the Treasurer. A shout out to Steve Camper, the member for Rockdale, and to Curtis Pitt, the member for Mulgrave, the Queensland member for Mulgrave. There are pros and cons to having moved around a lot and done a lot of different things, but I learnt a great deal from working on their Sydney and Cairns campaigns respectively. A shout out to Paul Smith and Deb Hall and my former colleagues in the forestry and climate change at DJPR, who the member for Macedon knows well. They are a very strong public service team and they taught me a lot about how to get things done in the public service. And as the member for Footscray knows, Deb Hall also part of a famous Western Oval mixed netball team back in the day. Thank you to Senator Don Farrell, David Feeney and Adele McBride. Adele could not be here today, but I know she will be watching on. I don't know which camera to look into, but hello, Adele. A huge thank you to Emily Segolge and Rachel Davies, who, along with Adele, ran our local Preston campaign. I started this chronology in 1997, and it's always disconcerting to me that both of them weren't born then. But they are incredible women, and in various different ways, I actually see a little of the young Lizzie Blanthorne in them. We had an amazing local campaign. Thank you to Arya, Reggie, Nidzam, Spencer, Guled, AJ and Finn, also none of whom were born in 1997. Thank you to Susie Byers, Daniel Scowler, Ranjan Jaleth, Geraldine and Gillian Wood, Peter Kemp, pretty much the entire Kemp Wood dynasty up our way. Thank you to Maureen Wilson, Michelle Zhang, Jim Shen, Louise Kenny Shen and Mick Ricardo. Thank you to Tracy Boucher for liking all of my Facebook posts. Thank you sincerely to our scrutineers. Ideally, you do not need to thank your scrutineers for scrutineering for 11 days straight, but thank you to Cam Petrie and Laura Blanthorne for leading that effort. Thank you to three women, the member for Northcote, Jed Carney, the member for Cooper, and Senator Jana Stewart. In our part of the world, in Darebin Labor, they are our leadership and they have taught me and many others a lot. And we actually used to live, we've just moved house, but we lived a few doors down from Jana and Marcus. And I really think it is one of the great things about Preston and Reservoir that you have a very significantly above average chance of running into one of our state's great First Nations leaders while you are in the Murray Road Woolworths in your tracksuit pants. And finally, a big thank you to the Premier. The Premier has a very deserved reputation as someone with an amazing track record of implementing Labor values, but he also should have a reputation as someone with an amazing track record of advocating for Labor values. When the Premier speaks about truth, justice and treaty, when he speaks about multiculturalism being our greatest asset, when he speaks about equality not being negotiable, a lot of people in Preston and Reservoir are listening. And if you know our demographics, you will understand why. And I will certainly join the Premier in making those comments for as long as we need to make them, both in order to support those who we need to support, but also because there are still out there people like myself back in 1997 who are not bad people in any way, have not done bad things, but still need to hear that sort of stuff in order that they can be good actors in building an inclusive society. Finally, I'd like to thank my family. The last 8 months have been a real challenge for us. We were lucky enough to be joined by Hannah. Hello, Hannah. But Hannah spent her first 37 days in hospital and she has a genetic disorder, hereditary sensory and autonomic neuropathy type 3, also known as familial dysautonomia. And good luck, I suppose, to the Hansard team in transcribing that one. It's not a great thing. You don't want to Google it. I hope one day that Hannah will be able to tell her own story, but for the time being, as her parents, we are very grateful to the staff at the Mercy, the Austin, the Northern and the Royal Children's, and thank you to Kulaman and Linu who were helping us out at the Northern on Saturday night. And I'm immensely grateful to our friends and family for getting us through that period, which of course overlapped with a tough election for all Labor candidates and also overlapped with us getting an eviction notice. Noah's parents, Danny and Esther and her uncle Jack have been immense and we are very lucky to have them. My brothers Andrew and Marcus were also a great help. They came out and door knocked on the campaign, and as brothers tend to do, they were nervous for about 15 minutes and then they started telling me how I should do it. And I know the minister will be particularly pleased to hear that my brother was very big on the power saving bonus. He loved it, as well he should. I learned something from him. I need to thank my mum, Marion. My mum grew up on a farm between Sea Lake and Nandaly at a time when farming in the Mallee was pretty tough, and through a farming accident she was involved in, things were probably tougher. But Mum is an amazing woman who never let her any of that hold her back. She's had such a rich life. She is such an inspiration. She taught everywhere in the Victorian education system, and then when some people suggested that it was time to retire from that, she moved instead to Abu Dhabi so she could continue teaching there for another 4 years, and then to Chiang Mai, and then to Legazpi in the Philippines, and so on. And Mum looked after Zoe for hundreds of hours, but again, in the way Mum operates, she saw me going out door knocking and said, "Hey, why didn't I come out and do that?" And with the fullest respect to our great young Labor team, after a few minutes, Mum was one of the best door knockers we had. Thank you to my uncle Rod Lambert, who couldn't be here but was very generous with his support of the campaign early on. Thank you as well, of course, to my dad. My dad is a very community-minded person. I like to think I inherited that. Hello, Dad. My dad, though, is also a very black and white engineer, and I also inherited that. And I wouldn't have it any other way, but it's a quite interesting combination. I'd like to thank Zoe for being Zoe. Hello, Zoe. Zoe's not listening. And finally, hello, Zoe. I'd like to thank Noah. Noah and I have been an absolute team all the way through this. Many of you would have received texts from me complaining about some local issue, and they would have been light-hearted and funny, and that would have been because Noah wrote them. And I would have written a first draft, and then she would have taken the phone out of my hands and reminded me that our friends are our friends, and they're more likely to do things for you if they like you. And probably one of the reasons this speech is a little patchy and also, sorry, Speaker, over time, is because I didn't give Noah enough time to look at it. And Noah is an incredible person in many ways, but her ability to stay positive over the last 8 months has carried me through it. Seriously, Noah could have been on the Titanic and she would have made jokes about it. I think we've had one argument in that time, and that was over the question of whether it's legitimate to put butter on pasta. But I have checked with the member for Monbulk, DiMartino, who does say that it is, which some of us think. So I have 3 things to say to Noah. The first is I love you. The second is a fun fact, which last year Noah was in the top 1% of Wiggles listeners on Spotify, and anyone who knows that world will know what an extraordinary achievement that is. That is literally thousands of hours, and I hope Zoe is grateful. And finally, I want to say to Noah, I think we should get married. I won't bring a ring out now because I'm not allowed to have any props, but it's securely stored at the moment, and I am planning, in fact, to bring it out very romantically tonight in the roughly 10 minutes between the kids falling asleep and us collapsing in exhaustion. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to speak a little bit today about myself and my family, but I'd like to conclude by saying this will be the last time. From here on in, it will be about the people of Preston and Reservoir, and for as long as they want a local, hard-working Labor member who listens and follows things up, they will have one. Thank you.